speeches, and I think we'd all agree that this is an important issue, an issue that we take seriously across all sides of the House. There are very few things that we can agree on, but I think that we can agree that there is a great need to still do a lot to address the domestic violence that is occurring in our country. In terms of Labor's track record, we do have a strong track record on domestic violence prevention. However, we do acknowledge that despite what we have done in this area, domestic violence remains a problem for many New Zealanders, and more does need to be done. So we will support this bill with some reservations, because we do not believe that this bill goes far enough. Before I begin, Mr. Speaker, and get into the details of this, I do want to acknowledge all of the organisations out there that work collaboratively, that work tirelessly to resolve issues around domestic violence and to work with and alongside the victims of domestic or family violence. And there are a number of them that could be mentioned, but I do want to make special mention of the collaborative efforts being undertaken by the Waitakere Family Violence Task Force. This task force includes Waitakere Anti-Violence Essential Services, Waitakere Abuse and Trauma Services, Man Alive, Viviana, the Violence-Free Waitakere, the Waitakere Police are part of this task force, the Waitakere City Council Mayor Bob Harvey is part of this task force. In fact, it was with his leadership, I think, that this began to begin with, and also the Deputy Mayor Penny Holtz is part of the task force. And it really is impressive, because it really is a collaborative group working together to ensure that the way in which this issue is addressed, the way in which this issue is resolved in the long term, is through collaborative efforts, so that everyone knows what everyone is doing and everyone's working together to address this. And I took Annette King to meet with the task force, I think last week, and she was equally as impressed and really saw the impressive collaborative efforts that were going on amongst the group and the commitment that they were demonstrating to this issue, to the families, to the children of Waitakere and to the community overall. So I really do want to acknowledge them before I get into this. So I just want to talk about some of the background to domestic violence, and it is shocking. It is incredibly shocking. Some of the statistics on domestic violence in New Zealand: in 2008, police responded to 82,692 incidents involving some form of domestic violence. 4 to 10% of New Zealand children experience physical abuse. 24% of girls and 11% of boys experience sexual abuse. In 2007, 6,400 children were involved in applications for protection orders. Most of these children had witnessed violence, and some had been subjected to violence directly. New Zealand's domestic violence rates don't compare well with other OECD countries, and we have the worst child death by maltreatment rate in the world. A recent report commissioned by Every Child Counts found that child abuse and neglect in New Zealand costs around $2 billion per year, and those are just some of the statistics in relation to this particular issue. Now, Mr. Speaker, sorry, just forgive me while I find my notes. Here we are. Now, Labor, of course, supports any measures to prevent and mitigate the harm of domestic violence. However, this bill is not, in our minds, ambitious enough and will fail to achieve its aim. We suggest the government progress Labor's domestic violence reform bill, which is languishing at the bottom of the order paper. The National-led government prides itself on its record in this area, claiming this is another bill to protect victims of domestic violence. When questioned about why Labor's domestic violence reform bill has not been progressed yet, Simon Power claims his ministry has insufficient resources. In 2008, the Labor government introduced the Domestic Violence Reform Bill, and this legislation, as I said, is still on the order paper. In the build-up to that bill, whilst it was being pulled together, extensive consultation and research took place. And as far as we're concerned on this side of the House, because it is an issue that we all take seriously, National really does need to put aside politics and ensure that it is pushed through, and it should have put aside politics to ensure that it was speedily progressed through Parliament, and it's unfortunate that it didn't happen. The reality is that this was languishing at the bottom of the paper when the National Government thought things like the 90-day fire at will bill was something that urgently needed to be put into place in their first 100 days in government. And that's the reality. That's the reality. When really something like this, something like our domestic violence bill, should have been given priority. The government has progressed other domestic violence legislation, but as I said before, it doesn't go far enough. They claim not to have the resources to be able to progress the other provisions, but yet they do have the resources to give tax cuts to the wealthiest chunk of New Zealanders out there. It does make you question what the government's priorities are. The Child and Family Protection Bill omits 5 important changes included in Labour's domestic violence legislation. Labour's bill changes the definition of child in the Domestic Violence Act to someone under the age of 18, in accordance with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Currently, a child is anyone under 17. This bill does not provide the court with the power to direct attendance to an addiction treatment program, whereas Labour's bill does give the family court this power. Labour's bill introduces a provision requiring any judge who declines a without notice application for a protection order to provide written reasons for declining the application, enabling the applicant to decide whether to proceed on notice. National's bill does not include a similar provision. Labour's proposals make provision for applicants to be able to attend information sessions which would provide advice on making effective use of protection orders and providing advice on any social assistance that may be available. Labour's bill contained better protections and provisions around applications for discharge of protection orders and allowed the court to order reports if necessary. So Simon Power says he intends to progress the remaining provisions of the Domestic Violence Reform Bill, but we would really like to know when that is going to happen and why there is a hold-up. If in theory Simon Power supports Labour's bill or the provisions that are in that bill, then there should be no reason to delay on it, particularly given the statistics that I opened with when I started the speech. Judith Collins issued a media release the 1st of October 2009 saying National's 2 new bills will tackle the evil of family violence, but neither she nor Simon Power have explained how omitting these 5 changes will improve things. Labour's members on the Select Committee believe that young people who are over 17 and were protected by an order when they were children should continue to be protected as long as they want to. But National members believe that protection orders should only protect children while they live with an applicant. So we will be supporting the bill, but I think I've stated very clearly what our reservations are with regards to the bill. We are concerned that our domestic violence bill is still languishing at the bottom of the order paper. We do plead with the government to take it seriously because we know that the government is concerned about the levels of domestic violence and the well-being of families and children, just as we are. We know that they are concerned, as are we, and so we would hope that therefore they would find a way of pushing through our domestic violence bill in a speedy manner.
Kanwal Bakshi.
Bring up Bakshi.
Mr. Speaker, I stand to support second reading of Child and Family Protection Bill. Since this government, under the leadership of Right Honourable John Key, was established, this national-led government has made commitment to strengthen the ability of the courts to act to protect children and families.